Before I get started, I just want to say that Black lives matter. Black people's lives have worth and are important and beautiful, and it pisses me off that we live in a world where that's some kind of controversial statement. And some of my fellow white people are kind of acting like the trend is past for now, but this isn't a trend. This is people's lives, and it's not over until Black people don't have to worry so much that a cop is going to shoot and kill them for existing. I'll put a link to a post that has petition links and places where you can donate in the thing down below. Now on with the video.
Viewer discretion is advised.
Cops is filmed on location with the men and women of law enforcement.
Cops was a long-running TV show that you've probably heard of, but also probably thought was canceled way before it recently was in 2020. And this show led to a lot of really bad things, including somebody's actual death, and I feel like it doesn't get talked about nearly as much as it should be. So, it's America, 1986. Reagan is president. Drugs are really bad now, and we're at war with them. Geraldo Rivera, that guy who talked for hours hyping up Al Capone's vault only to open it live on air and find absolutely nothing, is playing a documentary called American Vice, The Doping of a Nation. But he keeps interrupting it to show live drug busts. This special gets over 15 million views. Fast forward a couple years to 1988, and there's a Writers Guild strike. Writers wanted higher residuals and more creative rights. Keep fighting, WGA. The strike lasted 5 months, which if you remember the strike that happened in 07-08, this was 7 weeks longer. So the networks are looking for programming that doesn't have union writers to fill up those spots. And Fox is still a pretty new and young network at this time. And they're trying to establish themselves as a channel mainly for like young, straight, white, manly dudes. So Fox is like, oh no, a strike. What are we gonna do without Married with Children? And two dudes called John Langley and Malcolm Barber, who had previously worked on the American Vice documentary that Geraldo kept interrupting, were like, yeah, we got a show. It's called Cops. We follow cops. We edit together the fun parts. There's no union writers. And Fox was like, sold, we'll take 25 seasons, and then once we cancel it, Spike TV will pick it up. Spike TV also being a niche channel for manly men. And by this time in the late 80s, cops were really looking for some good PR, aka propaganda. And while some sheriffs were worried about there being too much transparency with this show, the Cops producers quickly assuaged those fears. If Navarro, that's the sheriff, didn't like something, he could kill it. This wasn't a deeply reported journalistic endeavor after all. This was about access. We said, if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for us, because it's by invitation, John Langley, the producer, recalls. We're not going to burn any cops or do anything that's going to screw up your department. That's the only way we can do the show. And what better way to let people know about the devastating effects of drugs and the heightened consequences you'll face if you're caught with them? The show starts out with the iconic theme song Bad Boys, and since the third season also includes a disclaimer,
All suspects are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law.
Each episode has a 3-act structure. In TV, act structures, act breaks are commercial breaks. And in Cops, the first act is going to be the one that really grabs your attention, which means that it's going to be action-packed, like a chase that probably ends in somebody getting tackled. I always associate Cops with tackling. The second act is more of a breather, usually focused on conversations and weirder domestic disputes. And then the third act ties it all off with something moral or heartwarming, like, don't do drugs, kids. Okay, now I'm about to give you the real tea on Cops because apparently, nobody knows about this. On August 26th, 2014, an Omaha, Nebraska officer called for backup for an armed robbery occurring at a Wendy's. One of the responding officers had the Cops crew with him, an unnamed camera person and audio technician Bryce Dion. Also, sorry, quick aside, the news article I was reading said that he would hold the microphone during filming, and what a gross oversimplification of what a sound engineer does, especially when you consider what happened to him. Super disrespectful. Anyway, the suspect pointed his weapon at the officers and they fired back at him, killing the suspect. And one of those bullets went through the gap in sound engineer Bryce Dion's bulletproof vest and killed him as well. And isn't the first rule of using a gun that you're supposed to know where it's being pointed? How do you accidentally shoot your sound guy? Also, why would you point your gun at the suspect if the sound guy was right next to him? And at the end of the day, why are you taking a civilian into an active shootout? And all of this was because this guy stole money from Wendy's, which is an insured national chain. But the robber was pointing a gun at them, you might say. And okay, to be fair, the cops thought that. They thought that. But what do you know? The gun wasn't a real fatal gun. The gun was an airsoft pistol that fired plastic bullets. All three of the involved officers were put on paid administrative leave, and a judge found that they acted reasonably. Which, honestly, shouldn't that still be manslaughter, though? Because they killed a civilian. Whether or not you meant to, you killed a totally innocent person who was filming a TV show to make you look good. And listen, I don't know what it's like to be a cop in that situation. They probably did fear for their own lives. But I feel like there's so many stories where we keep hearing about cops fearing for their own lives and not fearing quite enough for the lives of everybody else around them. And with the reputation cops have, sometimes them just showing up can escalate things so drastically. I don't know, call me utopian or whatever, but considering this doesn't happen so much in other still very, very flawed countries, I really don't think it has to happen that much here. And also, how do people not know about this? I literally assumed that I must have just totally forgotten about it, but I texted my friend, hey, did you hear about this? And she was like, no. And then I asked people on Twitter, and out of 14 people, none of them had ever heard of it either. But I don't think the show wants people to know about this. And part of my suspicion is because they had a 1000th episode special, Cops, Beyond the Bust. And usually these kinds of specials would have some kind of in memoriam or some kind of acknowledgement. And I watched a rip of this on Dailymotion, and it played the end credits, and there was no end screen saying R.I.P. Bryce Dion or anything like that.
Hello, Emily's British Robot here. It turns out they did do a clip show of Dion's work after the event, but there was no in memoriam segment in the 1000th episode, and there probably should have been. But that probably would have bummed people out and gotten in the way of their mirth and mockery. Also, I like how this robot knows how to pronounce my weird name. Now on with the show.
On August 21st, 2017, Cops had a special for their 1000th episode, hosted by Terry Crews, who plays a cop on Brooklyn Nine-Nine. But that's another video for another day. In this special, they play some of the top clips, and Terry Crews interviews some of the people who had been on the show. At the very beginning, this special lets us know that this is not just showing the reality of policing, it's entertainment. The live studio audience is gasping and cringing at all of the car crashes and everything, not to mention how funny people find the show. This is meant to be entertainment, catharsis, and they tell us stories with happy endings. 2 of these men even say that getting arrested actually really changed their lives for the better. Terry Crews interviews a cop and a cameraman who were shot at on camera. The officer says that when the perp shot at him, he got excited, the camera adding to the excitement. What the hell? But that's part of the behavior that the show encourages. If you're with the cops crew, you're absolutely going to go for the most epic sounding cases and try to be a big damn hero. So along with the incentive to get your arrests, there's an incentive to get on TV too. What used to be a scary situation that no one should ever want to be in suddenly becomes a potential moment for glory. Instead of thinking, hey, I need to stop this guy in the interest of his and everyone else's safety, the cop is thinking, oh yeah, I'm about to be a big damn hero on national TV. So who ends up on Cops? Well, for one thing, poor people. They obviously aren't going to go into my parents' neighborhood, which is really just a cul-de-sac within another cul-de-sac within another cul-de-sac. They don't bust white-collar criminals, and even if they did film busts on the rich, those people can afford lawyers who will ensure that that footage never sees the light of day. According to this study done in 2004, 92% of the police officers shown were white, and only 1 out of 50 cops shown was a woman. 38% of offenders were white, while 45% were black. Black men were overrepresented as perpetrators of violent crime. After this study, the show tried to make things more diverse and show more white perpetrators. But according to the Running from Cops podcast, the black people who were portrayed as suspects were typically put in the first act, the one with all the tackling and implying more serious or dangerous crime. And the producers say that that's not intentional, that they just put whatever has the most action up front. But that's going to affect how people view crime statistics, especially for white viewers who live in predominantly white areas. Also, considering that Black people are much more likely to be stopped and searched without reason and are more likely to be subjected to more force and restraint. Wow, I wonder why they have so much footage of Black people running away, as if they're scared or something. Speaking of racism in the police force, let's look at some of the police officers that have worked with the show.
Birmingham, Alabama.
Mayor, there's also a long history of police brutality in Birmingham. I wonder if you think the entire police department needs an overhaul.
Miami, Florida.
Once I got my hands up, they're not going to shoot me. This is what I'm thinking. They're not going to shoot me. Wow, was I wrong? They cuffed my hands and they flipped me over. And I'm saying to them, I'm like, sir, why did you shoot me? And his words to me, he said, I don't know.
I am. Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that?
He took me in front of the car and proceeded to belittle me.
Henderson, a doctor, has been on the front lines assisting South Florida's most vulnerable populations during the pandemic.
I don't know exactly what made him get out of the car and then put handcuffs on me after he got out of the car.
Officer Reynaldo Goyos was fired after an internal investigation led by 4 senior officers ruled the shooting was unjustified. Goyos appealed the chief's decision through a process common to police departments nationwide known as arbitration. Less than 2 years later, a sole arbitrator overturned his termination, ordering the chief to bring Goyos back on force.
New Orleans.
Ferguson says commanders on the bridge only gave the okay to use tear gas canisters like this. They say they have no rubber bullets. Fired without approval were rubber balls.
9 officers were busted on federal drug charges. But before more arrests could be made, the sting was called off when agents learned one of the officers, Len Davis, may have plotted to kill Kim Groves, a woman who filed a brutality complaint against him a day earlier.
7 NOPD officers rode in this budget rental truck to the bridge that links Gentilly to New Orleans East and opened fire when they arrived at the scene. 6 people were shot, 2 killed, including 40-year-old Ronald Madison, a severely handicapped man who was unarmed.
Los Angeles.
She was pulled out of her vehicle, thrown to the ground, handcuffed, brought back to the police cruiser, and then hip-tossed to the ground very violently while in handcuffs.
I started screaming and yelling because I thought I was going to die. I needed someone to see what was going on.
Someone did. This cell phone video shows 4 officers on top of Weekly, and one appears to punch him in the face. Weekly's attorney says he was hit 4 times and sustained a broken cheekbone, nose, and a concussion.
And Minneapolis, where George Floyd was recently murdered after an officer put his knee on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds as 3 other police officers helped. Bad apples my ass. Like I said, the cops on cops get to veto any footage they don't like, and they get a lot of input in how they're portrayed. They're like Kris Jenner, the Kardashians' momager. That's another video for another day.
But I think that's so interesting because the perps didn't get veto votes. They don't even get a follow-up or a talking head telling their side. And sure, people could refuse to sign stuff and have their faces blurred, but they didn't get to dictate the programming like the cops did.
And some of the people depicted on the show don't recall ever signing a release form. The podcast Running from Cops goes into the show in great detail and has so many people who allege that they either never signed a release or were under the influence of something when they signed, or thought that a release meant that they'd be released, or they thought that it would make things easier for them, or they did it thinking it was a legal thing, or they did it under duress because they were being arrested. At the end of the day, how much consent can there really be when the person asking you to sign this has a cop standing over their shoulder? And the voiceover says innocent until proven guilty, but we don't get to see how that plays out. And just because someone might be innocent until proven guilty in a court of law doesn't mean that they're going to realistically be viewed that way in the court of public opinion. Especially since that podcast I mentioned earlier detailed an episode where there was a positive roadside drug test that was wrong, and the show never mentions that these people were actually innocent and not carrying around crack, so there's no development on the part of the suspects. We just see what might be one of the worst moments of their lives. We don't know if they really did it, or more importantly to me, Why? The cops just paint them as the bad guys who they just caught. But just because someone was arrested doesn't mean that they're a bad person, or even that they did the thing that they're being arrested for. And so many of these crimes are related to drugs. A bunch of them back in the day were for weed, something that's mostly legal now and used commonly for pain. How many of the people who were caught with drugs were essentially self-medicating? They need help, not humiliation. There's basically two kinds of crime. Victimless crime, which would probably be reevaluated as a concept, and crimes where there is a victim. And in the case of victimless crime, could probably be handled without all the tackling and punishment. And in the cases of crimes where there is a victim, I feel like this could still be considered insensitive to them too. Based on some of the things the producers have said, I get the idea that they think that this is a subversive show, that the people at home will watch and think that the cops are just going entirely too far. But there's nobody to say that. And the last word is usually that of the cops, who come up with potentially ad hoc justifications for why they do what they do. Like, hey, this guy could have died, so really, by arresting him, we're really saving his life here. A lot of people credit Cops with sort of kickstarting reality TV, and arguably, but I don't know, I'd argue that Cops, despite how groundbreaking it was at the time, still kind of had more in common structurally with Candid Camera, which had been on since the 40s, than it does with most modern reality TV, which probably more so traces to The Real World, which was in the early 90s. I don't know how much The Real Housewives can really trace back to Cops. However, there was another recently canceled show that can be traced back to Cops. Live PD happened when Dan Abrams, ABC legal analyst, said, hey, Cops is just a highlight reel. It's edited. You want real cinema verite? We'll do it live.
We'll do it live! Fuck it! Do it live!
Like Cops, Live PD showed real cops, but unlike Cops, it was unedited and live. It also had a lot of commentary, all from cops and former cops and people on the side of cops. And the best part is, while they would occasionally blur faces, they decided that they didn't need to, because as a live program, it was more news than entertainment, so they didn't require a release. I don't have time to get too far into that show, but the podcast Running from Cops also talks more about that too if you want more information. But what emotional and cognitive effect does this show have on the people who watch it? Well, according to this one article that has been very helpful in the writing of this video, Gray Cavender, a criminologist at Arizona State University who's been studying how the media presents issues of law, crime, and justice for 2 decades, says that research has consistently shown 4 things about people who watch shows like Cops. They believe there's more crime than there actually is. They believe that they're more likely to be a victim of it than they are. They believe that Black people commit more of it than they do. And they believe that police are better at catching perpetrators than they are. Cops showed more crime than there really is, which makes people think that there's more of a need for beat cops. Cops also shows that they almost always get their person, the right person, and we only see up to the arrest, thinking that the cop has essentially won. But we shouldn't measure police success by how many arrests they have, especially when most of those arrests are for things like drug crimes or poverty-related crimes that could have easily been prevented if more of those resources went into prevention over punitive justice. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure and all that. But finally, Cops plays on feelings of fear, excitement, shock, awe. It's a cathartic experience, so you want to see the really wacky stuff. You want to see the chase and the tackling. You want someone to say something so hilariously foolish that you chortle. And you want a moral message to top it all off that fits within your lifestyle. I don't do crystal meth. The authority figure says doing crystal meth is bad. I am doing the right thing. The person on the screen is doing the wrong thing. I am better than that person. Or if you do also do the crime, then you can laugh at the person who was foolish enough to get caught. Either way, it's Schadenfreude, which is a German word for the pleasure and joy felt at another person's misfortune or humiliation. Why do the Germans have a word for that? It's mocking other people's suffering, or at least getting something emotional out of it. Consuming it mindlessly. And it makes me wonder if some of the shows make the law-abiding viewers on some level want more crime. Not the kind of crime that they could be victims of course, but this victimless crime that Cops is so known for. Because then, hey, maybe I don't need to feel so bad about the people who have it worse than me, because they probably deserve it. They probably aren't as smart as me, and they've probably done drugs or something. I can say that the effect of their poverty is actually the cause. I'm better than this lowlife on the screen, and that means I don't have to change a thing about myself.
And that is it for us today. I'm Bill O'Reilly. Thanks again for watching.